The blinding flare of halogen high beams cut through the torrential North Carolina rain, followed by the deafening, horrific crunch of crumpling steel that shattered the quiet midnight highway. At 34 years old, Eleanor Vance had spent the better part of a decade building Vance Living from a tenuous two-person startup into a multi-million-dollar empire of eco-friendly, modern residential communities. She was a self-made woman in every sense of the word, forged in the crucible of early hardship, working-class grit, and relentless determination. Raised by a hard-working father who greased gears as an auto mechanic and a loving mother who mended clothes well past midnight to afford basic groceries, Eleanor had inherited an unshakable work ethic and a deep empathy for working-class families. She had poured every drop of her youth, intellect, and physical energy into creating beautiful, sustainable, and affordable sanctuaries for teachers, nurses, electric line workers, and firefighters, proof that sheer grit could overcome humble circumstances. But on that slick stretch of asphalt, an erratic semi-truck blowing through a red signal rendered all her proud life accomplishments instantly fragile. Her luxury SUV rolled twice before violently slamming into a thick concrete freeway barrier. Inside the crushed steel frame, her physical body absorbed the brutal impact. By the time emergency medical crews extricated her from the wreckage with heavy hydraulic equipment, her physical frame was shattered, yet her spirit was still stubbornly clinging to life. Emergency surgery at the Regional Trauma Center barely saved her from dying on the operating table, yet a severe traumatic brain injury, compounded by a post-operative ischemic stroke, left her suspended in a terrifying living nightmare. When Eleanor finally drifted back into awareness inside the intensive care unit, the world felt distant, filtered through the sterile hum and rhythmic beeping of medical machinery. She attempted to lift her right hand to wipe away the sweat on her brow, but her nervous system completely refused the command. She tried to part her lips to speak, to call out for help, or even to emit a faint groan, but her throat produced no sound whatsoever. The devastating reality settled in like a heavy block of lead. She was totally paralyzed, unable to move a single muscle below her eyelids or articulate a single syllable. She was trapped entirely inside her own mind, a conscious prisoner behind her motionless eyes, forced to listen in helpless silence to the mechanical monitors measuring her fragile, flickering heartbeat. The heavy glass ICU door creaked open, admitting soft footsteps and the subtle scent of expensive sandalwood cologne, a luxury fragrance Eleanor had personally gifted her husband, Julian, for their third wedding anniversary. 34-year-old Eleanor felt a sudden surge of emotional warmth, genuinely believing her husband had come to offer love and comfort in her darkest hour. Julian, a 42-year-old charismatic venture capitalist whom she had married after a whirlwind romance, leaned over the stainless steel bed rail. He gently enveloped Eleanor's motionless right hand between his own warm palms, looking every bit the picture of a heartbroken, devoted spouse to any medical staff passing by the frosted glass doorway. He smoothed a stray lock of dark hair from her damp forehead with a tender, practiced gesture that appeared entirely sincere to the outside world. However, the exact moment the attending physician stepped out into the corridor to address a desk nurse, Julian's affectionate posture instantly melted away. His grip on her limp fingers slackened, turning cold, mechanical, and indifferent. He turned around toward his 21-year-old son, Gavin, Eleanor's stepson, who stood casually at the foot of the bed, leaning against the IV pole with an expression of bored impatience and detachment. The doctor said the brain swelling is finally plateauing, but her motor functions are essentially gone. Julian muttered in a low, flat tone, completely devoid of warmth or concern. Gavin crossed his arms over his designer jacket, scoffing softly under his breath. So she's basically a vegetable now? Dad, we need to file for emergency medical power of attorney today. The insurance company isn't going to cover endless weeks of high-end neuro-rehabilitation, and I am certainly not letting her hard-earned fortune drain away on hopeless physical therapy sessions. Julian let out a faint, dismissive chuckle, resting his hands casually on his hips as he looked down at his wife's motionless form. Don't worry, son. I'm already having the corporate attorneys draft the conservatorship paperwork claiming she's permanently mentally incapacitated. Once we lock down her medical decisions, we cut off the aggressive rehab, save the liquid capital, and move her to a quiet, long-term care facility out in the rural county. He paused, gazing out the window toward the city skyline. And then, we put the lakefront estate on the market. The detached garage alone will easily fund your new investment portfolio. Behind her closed eyelids, Eleanor felt an overwhelming wave of agony, far more severe than the physical trauma fracturing her ribs and spine. A single, hot tear leaked from the corner of her right eye, disappearing silently into the white cotton pillowcase, entirely unobserved by the two men standing beside her bed. The sting of betrayal cut straight to her soul. She had met Julian 3 years ago, when he presented himself as a sophisticated, deeply supportive partner who claimed to admire her fiercely independent spirit and professional ambition. She had welcomed his son, Gavin, into her life with open arms, funding his lavish lifestyle, paying off his accumulated credit card debts, and offering him every opportunity to build a respectable career. She had genuinely believed they were a loving family, a safe haven where she could finally rest her weary shoulders after years of relentless corporate striving. Now, listening to their hushed, calculating conversation, the horrific truth unraveled before her. Her entire marriage had been a meticulously engineered financial charade. Julian had never loved her. He had merely been waiting for a tragic opportunity to claim her hard-earned real estate empire. They were not praying for her recovery. They were eagerly planning her financial execution while she was still breathing right in front of them. Yet, amid the crushing weight of heartbreak, a quiet, formidable spark of resilience began to ignite deep within Eleanor's chest. Growing up with nothing had taught her how to survive when the odds were stacked against her. Building a multi-million-dollar empire from scratch had taught her how to read people and strategize under extreme pressure. Her current physical silence, intended by her captors to be her ultimate weakness, suddenly transformed into her greatest strategic asset. Julian and Gavin believed she was mindless, deaf, and helpless. They assumed her spirit was broken along with her spine. They were terribly mistaken. Eleanor realized that as long as they remained completely ignorant of her mental awareness, they would speak freely in her presence, exposing their entire fraudulent plot before they could ever execute it. The heavy door clicked closed as Julian and Gavin departed to meet with their corporate real estate agent for an expensive lunch, leaving the hospital room shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence. A few moments later, the door slid open again, accompanied by lightweight, purposeful footsteps. It was Clara Jenkins, a 28-year-old dedicated registered nurse assigned to Eleanor's one-on-one intensive care unit. Clara moved with a quiet, practiced grace, her scrub uniform neat and her expression radiating genuine human compassion. Unlike the previous float nurses, who worked silently or spoke over Eleanor as if she were an inanimate piece of furniture, Clara always treated her patients with deep personal dignity. She stepped up to the side of the bed, checking the intravenous lines, adjusting the oxygen flow rate, and carefully smoothing out the microscopic wrinkles in the bedsheets to prevent pressure sores on Eleanor's fragile skin. "Good afternoon, Eleanor," Clara spoke gently, her tone calm, respectful, and soothing in the sterile room. "I'm just going to refresh your IV fluids and check your blood pressure now." Clara paused, standing near the head of the bed, her sharp, empathetic eyes catching the faint glint of moisture on Eleanor's cheek. She leaned in closer, setting her medical clipboard down on the bedside table. Clara was no stranger to severe neurological trauma. Her younger brother, Leo, had been born profoundly deaf, and growing up as his primary advocate had given her an extraordinary sensitivity to nonverbal cues and subtle human emotion. Clara looked directly into Eleanor's eyes, noting an intense, lucid brightness behind her pupils that completely defied the severe brain injury diagnosis recorded on her medical chart. Clara felt a powerful intuition stirring in her heart. "Eleanor," Clara whispered softly, ensuring her tone remained entirely non-threatening and low enough not to carry into the busy hallway outside. "I know the doctor said you aren't responsive right now, but I see you in there. Can you hear me?" Eleanor summoned every single ounce of her remaining mental focus, pushing past the heavy fog of pain medications and neurological fatigue. She concentrated all her willpower on the delicate muscles surrounding her eyelids, opening her eyes as wide as her condition permitted, and staring directly into Clara's gentle, attentive gaze. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She glanced quickly toward the frosted glass window of the ICU door to confirm no staff members or visitors were watching from the hallway, then leaned down even closer to the pillow. "If you can understand what I am saying to you right now," Clara instructed in a barely audible whisper, "blink twice for me." Eleanor didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. She closed her eyelids firmly, opened them, and then closed them firmly a second time. Blink, blink. Clara's hand froze over the blanket, her eyes widening with a mixture of profound shock and deep empathy. "Oh my goodness," Clara breathed, tears welling in her own eyes as she recognized the complete clarity and intent in Eleanor's response. "You're completely aware, aren't you?" Eleanor blinked once, a deliberate, unequivocal yes. Remembering her brother Leo and the years they spent communicating through subtle physical cues, Clara held her breath and watched Eleanor's motionless right hand resting on the white sheet. She saw the index finger twitch, a minute, agonizingly slow physical effort. Clara gently touched Eleanor's hand, offering a firm, steadying surface for her fingers. "Take your time," Clara encouraged softly. "Try again. I'm watching." Concentrating with ferocious intensity, Eleanor forced her index finger and thumb to shift slightly, forming the distinct, fundamental shape of the letter L in American Sign Language. Clara stared at the hand, then gasped quietly as the realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. "An L," Clara whispered, her mind racing to connect the clue. She leaned down to Eleanor's ear. "Are you trying to say lawyer?" Eleanor immediately blinked twice, a firm, emphatic yes. Clara looked toward the hallway, her compassionate expression hardening into absolute resolve. "Do your husband and stepson know you can communicate?" Eleanor blinked once. "No." Clara nodded instantly, understanding the grave danger surrounding her young patient. "Don't worry, Eleanor. Your secret is safe with me. We are going to get you your attorney." The following morning, well before the pale dawn light could fully filter through the heavy blinds of the intensive care unit, Marcus Sterling arrived carrying a worn leather briefcase and an indelible aura of quiet authority. At 55 years old, Marcus was not merely one of the most formidable corporate litigators in the state of North Carolina. He was Eleanor's trusted legal mentor, surrogate uncle, and faithful guardian, having expertly guided her through every corporate milestone since she founded Vance Living a decade ago. He stepped into the sterile room under the clever guise of a distressed family friend paying an early personal visit, dressed in a sharp navy suit that subtly signaled his professional readiness for battle. Beside him stood Dr. Harrison, the senior attending neurosurgeon, along with Clara Jenkins, who had just finished her morning rounds. The atmosphere inside the glass-walled room was thick with unspoken tension, yet meticulously grounded in deliberate strategy. Julian's premature request for emergency medical power of attorney had already landed on Dr. Harrison's desk late the previous evening, pushed through by Julian's high-priced estate lawyers. However, rather than denying the paperwork outright, which would immediately tip Julian off, panic the greedy husband, and trigger an aggressive public court battle before Eleanor was legally protected, Dr. Harrison had strategically documented that Eleanor's neurological metrics were currently in an evaluative state of flux. By filing a mandatory 48-hour medical hold based on minor fluctuations in intracranial pressure readings, Dr. Harrison bought Marcus the critical window of time he desperately needed to fortify Eleanor's legal standing. Marcus stood quietly beside Eleanor's bed, his seasoned, weathered face heavy with profound personal concern as he gazed down at the brilliant young woman he had watched build a residential empire from nothing. He gently placed his warm hand over her paralyzed forearm, leaning down close to her pillow. "Eleanor, my dear," Marcus spoke softly, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "Clara told me everything that happened. I am right here beside you, and we are going to fight this betrayal with every ounce of legal and moral strength we possess." Eleanor blinked once, a strong, deliberate, and unequivocal confirmation that radiated absolute mental acuity. Marcus took a deep, steadying breath, pulling a chair close to the head of the bed, while Dr. Harrison discreetly stood guard near the closed door. The covert counteroffensive for Vance Living had officially begun in the quiet sanctuary of the hospital room. To bridge the agonizing gap between Eleanor's razor-sharp executive mind and her paralyzed physical body without alerting her husband, Marcus produced a specialized, ultra-thin medical tablet equipped with state-of-the-art eye-tracking technology. Clara expertly adjusted the flexible mounting arm attached to the bed frame, positioning the high-definition screen directly within Eleanor's line of sight, just inches above her eyes. The advanced optical sensors calibrated within seconds, tracking the precise movement of Eleanor's pupils as they focused on an on-screen digital keyboard. What would have taken hours of painstaking single-finger sign language was instantly revolutionized by modern technology. With astonishing speed, ferocious concentration, and remarkable accuracy, Eleanor's eyes danced across the virtual keys, spelling out crisp, articulate, and commanding sentences that echoed softly through the tablet's encrypted text-to-speech module. "Julian is attempting to dismantle the company. He believes I am a vegetable. Check the Vance Family Trust immediately," the digital voice articulated with steady clarity. Marcus stared at the screen, his eyes widening in profound relief, mixed with fierce pride. Eleanor was not merely conscious. Her formidable business intellect was operating at peak capacity, despite her physical confinement. Through rapid eye-gaze typing, Eleanor dictated precise, strategic instructions to her attorney. She instructed him to verify the vault security codes at headquarters, review the corporate voting proxies, and place an immediate freeze on her personal electronic signatures across all banking institutions. She detailed every single sentence she had overheard Julian and Gavin whisper at her bedside the previous afternoon, down to their plot to list the lakefront estate and cut off her neurorehabilitation funding. Every word was automatically encrypted, time-stamped, and uploaded directly to Marcus's secure legal server, establishing an undeniable paper trail of her sound mind and explicit legal instructions. "You are incredible, Eleanor," Marcus whispered, a victorious smile breaking across his face. "With this technology, you are no longer silent. You are dictating your own defense, and they have no idea what is coming." Eleanor blinked twice, her decisive signal for "understood," as a spark of fierce, indomitable hope ignited in her eyes. Sitting beside the hospital bed, Marcus opened his leather briefcase and spread out several crucial estate planning documents, verifying the structural integrity of Eleanor's corporate empire. He explained the legal architecture to Clara and Dr. Harrison in quiet, measured tones. Fortunately, when Eleanor structured Vance Living 3 years ago, she listened to my advice and built an ironclad corporate fortress, Marcus revealed softly, turning a crisp page. Every major asset, the development company, the eco-residential holdings, the commercial land, and the lakefront mansion, is held exclusively within the Vance Family Trust, created well before her marriage to Julian. Because Eleanor had established the trust independently as a single woman, Julian possessed 0 corporate voting rights, 0 board seats, and no legal claim to the principal assets. His access was strictly restricted to a joint household checking account used for monthly residential expenses, a sum that, while substantial, was mere pocket change compared to Eleanor's multi-million-dollar estate. However, Marcus's expression grew grave as he pulled up a notification from the county clerk's office on his laptop screen. "Julian isn't just trying to gain medical guardianship," Marcus warned, pointing at the document. "His private attorneys submitted a fraudulent emergency motion this morning, claiming your brain injury has rendered you permanently incapacitated. They are attempting to bypass the trust rules by declaring him your sole legal conservator. If a probate judge granted that conservatorship under the false impression that Eleanor was a vegetable, Julian would gain temporary authority to sign corporate documents on her behalf." Eleanor's eyes flashed with intense fury as she quickly typed on her eye-tracking tablet, "Not on my watch. Block the conservatorship." Marcus nodded firmly. "I am filing an emergency stay with the probate judge today, attaching Dr. Harrison's medical affidavit confirming your cognitive affidavit. Julian's fraudulent motion will be dead on arrival." To construct an unshakable criminal case that would dismantle Julian's scheme permanently, Marcus retained Evelyn Reed, a veteran licensed private investigator and former federal agent known for her ironclad financial surveillance work. Understanding the strict boundaries of North Carolina privacy laws, Evelyn designed a surveillance strategy that avoided illegal wiretapping while gathering undeniable, court-admissible evidence. First, Evelyn activated the cloud-based security camera system inside Eleanor's private home office at the Lakefront Mansion, a system owned solely by Eleanor, making the footage completely legal before any court. Within hours, motion alerts flashed on Evelyn's phone, catching Gavin red-handed as he opened Eleanor's filing cabinets, photographing confidential property deeds and removing original vehicle titles. Second, Evelyn shadowed Julian and Gavin into the public arena, where the expectation of privacy did not exist under federal law. Posing as a wealthy patron at an upscale steakhouse downtown, Evelyn sat at an adjacent booth, using a directional microphone and high-definition lens to record Julian boasting to a luxury real estate broker. "My wife's condition is terminal. She won't survive the month," Julian was captured saying on video, raising a glass of scotch. "We want the lakefront property listed discreetly by next Friday. The moment her conservatorship clears, we sign the closing papers." Meanwhile, Gavin was photographed meeting with an antique art liquidator, arranging an unauthorized private appraisal of Eleanor's valuable oil paintings. Every photograph, every time-stamped video file, and every financial transaction request was methodically cataloged into Evelyn's master dossier. They were not merely catching 2 greedy men making cold-hearted remarks. They were documenting a premeditated, systematic conspiracy to commit grand larceny, fraud, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The net was quietly tightening around Julian and Gavin, while they remained completely oblivious to the trap being set. Later that afternoon, the heavy glass door slid open once again as Julian and Gavin walked into the ICU, carrying a bouquet of white lilies, a flower Eleanor had always despised for its somber, funeral connotations. Julian adjusted his designer jacket, adopting an expression of practiced grief as he approached the bed, completely unaware that Evelyn's surveillance team had documented his private lunch meeting just 2 hours prior. "Hello, sweetheart," Julian cooed in a warm, theatrical voice, leaning down to kiss Eleanor's forehead. His scent made Eleanor's stomach turn, but she kept her facial muscles entirely slack, projecting the exact image of a mindless, comatose patient. Gavin sauntered over to the bedside table, picking up Eleanor's designer handbag and casually rummaging through her personal wallet under the pretense of looking for insurance cards. "I talked to the financial advisors, Eleanor," Julian whispered, stroking her motionless arm with cold detachment. "Don't you worry about a thing. Gavin and I are taking care of all your business affairs, so you can rest peacefully." Gavin pulled out a rare diamond tennis bracelet from Eleanor's purse, slipping it into his pocket with a smirking glance at his father. "Yeah, Eleanor, just rest," Gavin added carelessly, barely bothering to look at her face. "We've got everything under control." Eleanor lay completely still, absorbing every dishonest word and every covert action. Behind her motionless eyelids, her mind was executing a masterclass in emotional discipline. She felt no fear, only a cold, crystalline resolve. She knew that inside Marcus's briefcase rested her eye-tracking transcript, Dr. Harrison's medical affidavit, and Evelyn's surveillance dossier. Julian and Gavin believed they were playing a game against a helpless, silent victim who couldn't fight back. They had no idea that the silent woman lying in that hospital bed had already checkmated them in secret, and their public downfall was only days away. Every night, precisely at 8 o'clock, when formal visiting hours ended and the hospital quieted into a low hum, Eleanor's room transformed into an intense, secret rehabilitation sanctuary. Under Dr. Harrison's implicit approval and Clara's watchful coordination, David Vance, a retired master physical therapist from the Veterans Affairs Health System, was wheeled into Eleanor's room. David was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with silver hair, a booming laugh, and a legendary reputation for pulling broken soldiers back onto their feet through sheer, uncompromising willpower. "I hear you built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire before 34, David said with a warm grin during their very first midnight session, locking the wheels of his equipment cart. "Well, Eleanor, today you're going to build something much harder, your own neural pathways." Eleanor blinked twice, her now familiar double blink for challenge accepted. The physical therapy was nothing short of brutal. Because Julian had explicitly demanded that all high-intensity neurorehabilitation be canceled to save money, every stretch, resistance exercise, and sensory stimulation had to be conducted in absolute secrecy. David focused relentlessly on Eleanor's right side, where the stroke had left her nervous system dormant. He applied cold therapy, electrical stimulation, and deep tissue manipulation to wake up the sleeping nerve endings. Tears of sheer exhaustion and agonizing pain regularly leaked from Eleanor's eyes as she strained every fiber of her being to twitch a muscle or flex a toe. Her shoulder burned like fire, and her fingers cramped painfully into tight fists. There were nights when the mental and physical agony brought her to the absolute brink of despair. Nights when giving up felt infinitely easier than fighting an uphill battle against her broken body. But whenever doubt threatened to swallow her, David would lean in close, his voice steady and resolute. You built communities brick by brick, Eleanor. You didn't finish those neighborhoods in a day, and you won't heal in a day either. Give me 1 millimeter tonight. Just one. That relentless perseverance became her lifeline. The fire that fueled Eleanor's agonizing physical recovery was not merely a desire to walk again, but a profound, unyielding need to reclaim her human dignity and protect the legacy she had worked so hard to build. As a young woman growing up in a cramped, drafty house where her father worked 16-hour shifts at the auto shop, Eleanor had learned early that nobody was coming to rescue her. She had built Vance Living through sheer intellect, midnight oil, and an unblemished reputation for integrity. To watch Julian and Gavin treat her life's work as a free lottery ticket was an insult that burned deeper than any physical pain in her damaged nerves. Every time her right leg refused to respond during a grueling leg lift exercise, Eleanor pictured Julian's arrogant smile as he talked about listing her lakefront estate, or Gavin slipping her diamond bracelet into his coat pocket. That righteous anger transformed into pure fuel. By the end of the second week of secret midnight sessions, the miraculous began to happen. Eleanor managed to lift 3 fingers on her right hand independently. A few days later, she achieved a slight, controlled flex in her right knee. When she managed to hold her right arm suspended above her chest for 5 full seconds, Clara clapped her hands over her mouth to suppress a sob of joy, while David beamed with fatherly pride. "Look at that," David whispered, his eyes shining in the dim hospital light. "That's not a miracle, Eleanor. That's pure, stubborn, unadulterated grit." Eleanor formed a crooked, faint smile on the right side of her mouth, a small physical victory that signaled her nervous system was rapidly rewiring itself. While Eleanor fought her physical battle inside the quiet confines of her room, Evelyn Reed continued to expand her covert surveillance network, uncovering shocking new depths of betrayal that shattered any lingering doubts about Julian and Gavin's intentions. Late one Thursday evening, Evelyn slipped into Eleanor's room, carrying an encrypted flash drive and a thick leather folder. With Clara guarding the door, Marcus plugged the drive into his laptop, projecting the contents directly onto Eleanor's eye-tracking screen. The first file contained audio and video captured from a hidden camera inside an upscale funeral home downtown. Julian was filmed sitting across from a funeral director, casually reviewing gold-embossed memorial brochures and selecting top-tier mahogany caskets. "We want everything pre-planned and ready to execute the moment she passes," Julian's recorded voice echoed softly through the room. "Keep it elegant, but don't spend more than necessary from the estate." Eleanor stared at the screen, a cold chill running down her spine. They were literally shopping for her casket while she was sweating through physical therapy. The second file was even more appalling. Evelyn had intercepted online auction listings created by Gavin under an anonymous account. Gavin had listed several priceless heirloom antiques that belonged exclusively to Eleanor's late mother, including a vintage silver tea set and a hand-carved mahogany jewelry box that held immense sentimental value. Gavin had described them online as estate items from a private collection, priced for quick sale. A silent, burning rage filled the room. Marcus's jaw set into a hard line, while Clara covered her mouth in disbelief. "They aren't just greedy, Eleanor," Evelyn said quietly, closing the laptop. "They are ruthless. They are liquidating your mother's memory before you're even out of the ICU." Eleanor's eyes flashed with fierce, icy determination as she typed on her screen. "Save the heirlooms. Let them dig their own graves." 3 weeks after the tragic accident that had nearly taken her life, Eleanor reached a pivotal milestone that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her fight. It was a cold Tuesday morning, long before sunrise, when the hospital corridors were deserted and hushed. David and Clara wheeled Eleanor into the private neurological therapy suite at the far end of the floor, securing the heavy double doors behind them. David placed 2 parallel wooden bars in front of Eleanor's wheelchair and locked her wheels firmly in place. "Today is the day, Eleanor," David said, his voice dropping all humor and becoming intensely serious. "Your nerves are firing, your muscles are responding, and your mind is ready. I don't care if it hurts, and I don't care if your knees shake. Stand up." Eleanor looked at the wooden bars, which felt a mile away. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Clara stepped in close, placing a supportive arm around Eleanor's waist, while David braced her weak left side. Eleanor planted her feet firmly on the cold floor, gritted her teeth, and pushed with every ounce of physical and mental energy remaining in her 34-year-old body. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Pain shot through her hips, and sweat poured down her face. Then, with a sudden, surging burst of willpower, her knees straightened. Eleanor stood upright for the first time in nearly a month. She was trembling violently, her chest heaving, but she was standing on her own 2 feet. "Don't just stand there," David commanded softly, pointing forward. "Take 1 step." Eleanor focused all her concentration on her right leg. Pain exploded in her joint, but she dragged her right foot forward 6 inches, then her left. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. By the time she reached the end of the parallel bars, tears were streaming down Clara's face. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the wall mirror, pale, exhausted, but standing tall. She opened her mouth, strained her vocal cords, and forced out a single, raspy, but perfectly clear word. "No." It was her first spoken word since the crash, a definitive refusal to let greed and betrayal dictate her fate. With Eleanor now capable of short, assisted walks and recovering her vocal capacity day by day, Marcus and Evelyn finalized the trap that would dismantle Julian and Gavin's conspiracy in the most public, undeniable way possible. Sitting around Eleanor's bed, Marcus laid out the golden opportunity: the annual Vance Living corporate charity gala, scheduled to take place in just 6 days at the Grand Bohemian Hotel in downtown Charlotte. The gala was the premier event of the year for the regional business community, attended by 400 prominent guests, including real estate developers, city council members, major media outlets, and key investors. Julian had already publicly announced that Eleanor was in a vegetative state and would be unable to attend. In fact, Julian planned to take the stage himself during the gala's keynote address to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award on Eleanor's behalf, officially announce his appointment as head of Vance Living, and sign the public documents transferring the foundation's executive oversight to Gavin. "They think they are walking into a victory celebration," Marcus said, with a cold, triumphant smile, tapping the event schedule. "Julian has already rehearsed his grieving husband's speech, and Gavin bought a tailored suit for his big announcement." Evelyn added, "We have coordinated with the local police department and the state attorney general's office. Detectives will be stationed discreetly inside the ballroom with arrest warrants pre-approved by the judge." Clara looked at Eleanor with deep admiration. "Are you sure you want to face them publicly like this, Eleanor? It's going to be intense." Eleanor sat upright in her bed, her posture straight and commanding once again. She looked at her attorney, her nurse, and her investigator, and spoke in a clear, measured, though slightly raspy voice that left no room for doubt. "Revenge is quiet, Clara. Truth requires witnesses. It's time to go to the gala. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Bohemian Hotel ballroom cast a warm, opulent glow across 400 of Charlotte's most prominent civic and business leaders, real estate developers, city council members, and philanthropist donors gathered for the annual Vance Living Corporate Charity Gala. Soft, elegant orchestral music drifted through the air, creating a sophisticated backdrop. But beneath the sparkling champagne glasses and polite laughter lay a carefully orchestrated theater of deceit, betrayal, and unbridled greed. Standing at the polished mahogany lectern on the main stage, 42-year-old Julian Vance wore a bespoke designer tuxedo, meticulously adjusting his posture to radiate an aura of tragic resilience and solemn executive dignity. He pressed a crisp white silk handkerchief to his eyes, dabbing at imaginary tears as he addressed the hushed audience in a voice heavy with rehearsed, melancholic sorrow. "My dear friends, honored guests, and esteemed business colleagues," Julian began, his voice trembling with theatrical grief that echoed perfectly through the acoustics of the grand ballroom. "As many of you know, my brilliant 34-year-old wife, Eleanor, remains trapped in a heart-wrenching vegetative state following that catastrophic highway accident 3 weeks ago. Every single hour spent beside her intensive care hospital bed has broken my heart anew. Yet I know in my soul that Eleanor would want her life's work to endure." Sitting in the front row, 21-year-old Gavin adjusted his designer cuffs, wearing a subtle, arrogant smirk that betrayed his true, unbridled excitement over their impending financial windfall. Julian paused dramatically, lowering his head to allow the sympathetic audience to absorb his grief before unrolling a thick, leather-bound binder waiting beside the microphone. To honor Eleanor's legacy and ensure the uninterrupted, stable stewardship of Vance Living, Julian continued smoothly, his sharp eyes scanning the room with practiced authority. "I am stepping forward tonight to assume full executive chairmanship of the Vance Family Trust. Beside me, my son Gavin will take over operational oversight of our charitable foundation. Together, we will protect her vision and expand her residential empire." As polite, sympathetic applause rippled through the grand hall, Julian unsheathed an expensive gold fountain pen, lowering the nib onto the official transfer document to execute his public, fraudulent takeover before the entire business community. Before the gold nib could make contact with the crisp parchment, the massive, brass-embossed double doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open with a resounding, echo-filling thud that silenced the 400 guests instantly. A cool evening breeze seemed to sweep into the hall as every single head turned toward the grand entrance in utter, breathless astonishment. There, framed against the warm, golden light of the marble foyer, stood Eleanor Vance. She was 34 years old, pale and slender, yet radiating an undeniable, regal dignity that instantly commanded the entire room. She wore an elegant navy blue silk gown, her dark hair pinned gracefully above her neck, completely abandoning the hospital gown, ICU monitors, and wheelchair that her husband had promised the world she would never leave. In her right hand, she held a sleek, polished dark wood walking cane, her fingers wrapped firmly around its silver handle. Beside her stood Clara Jenkins in an understated formal dress, offering a steady, respectful presence, while Marcus Sterling walked a half step behind them, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. The entire ballroom held its collective breath in stunned disbelief as Eleanor took her first deliberate step forward. Click. The sharp, metallic tap of her cane against the polished Italian marble floor echoed like a thunderclap through the dead silence of the hall. Click. Another measured, unwavering step. Julian's hand froze mid-air above the mahogany lectern, the gold pen slipping from his numb fingers and clattering loudly onto the stage floor. Beside him, Gavin's arrogant smirk instantly vanished, his face draining of all color until he looked as though he were staring at an impossible phantom risen from the grave. Eleanor didn't hurry, nor did she falter. With every rhythmic, powerful strike of her cane against the floor, she reclaimed her life, her company, and her human dignity, carving a path straight through the parted crowd toward the main stage. Reaching the base of the velvet-carpeted stairs, Eleanor accepted a gentle, steadying hand from Clara before ascending to the main stage with calm, deliberate grace. She stepped directly past a petrified Julian, taking her rightful place behind the microphone that he had just occupied. For several agonizing seconds, Eleanor looked out over the 400 silent faces of Charlotte's elite, her dark eyes bright with an unshakable, fierce intelligence that shattered every lie Julian had told. She adjusted the microphone stand, drew a deep, steady breath, and spoke into the silence. Her voice was slightly raspy from weeks of disuse, yet every single word resonated with crystal-clear authority and undeniable power across the ballroom speaker system. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor said, her voice growing stronger with every breath she took. "Reports of my cognitive demise have been greatly exaggerated." A collective gasp swept through the audience, followed by a surging wave of astonished whispering. Eleanor turned her gaze directly toward Julian and Gavin, who stood frozen beside her like statues of salt. "My husband stands before you tonight claiming to mourn my condition," Eleanor continued, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "In reality, while I lay conscious and paralyzed in the intensive care unit, Julian instructed my medical team to cancel my life-saving neurorehabilitation to save corporate funds." As Julian opened his mouth to protest, Marcus stepped forward, pressing a button on a wireless remote control. The giant projection screens hanging behind the stage instantly flickered to life. High-definition security video recorded from Eleanor's private home office showed Gavin stealing confidential property deeds from her filing cabinets. Audio recordings from an upscale steakhouse played clearly over the sound system, broadcasting Julian boasting to a broker about listing the lakefront mansion while Eleanor was still in ICU. Finally, public auction listings surfaced on screen, displaying Gavin attempting to sell Eleanor's late mother's heirloom antiques. The ballroom erupted in widespread horror and disgust. Sensing his entire world crumbling around him in front of the region's most powerful business figures, Julian snapped out of his paralyzed trance, his face twisting into a mask of desperate, furious bravado. He lunged toward the microphone, pointing an accusing finger at Eleanor. "This is an absurd, staged fabrication!" Julian shouted frantically, his voice cracking with desperation. "She is mentally unstable! Her brain injury has left her delusional, and these documents are forged lies designed to ruin me. I am her legal husband, and I just signed the binding corporate transfer paperwork right here on this stage." Marcus Sterling stepped smoothly between Julian and Eleanor, pulling a crisp, red-sealed legal document from his briefcase with a cold, victorious smile. "You are correct about one thing, Julian. You did just sign that document." Marcus's commanding voice echoed through the PA system, cutting Julian off completely. "And in doing so before 400 witnesses, you have officially walked directly into a federal law enforcement trap." Marcus held the sealed paper up for the audience and media cameras to see. This morning, the Honorable Judge Rebecca Vance of the Federal District Court issued an emergency court injunction completely freezing all assets of the Vance Family Trust and declaring Eleanor Vance fully mentally competent based on certified medical affidavits. The document you just signed on this stage was an illegal, fraudulent attempt to usurp federal banking regulations and forge corporate voting rights. Marcus leaned toward Julian, his tone dropping to a sharp, icy whisper that the microphone still picked up. By signing that fraudulent transfer while under an active federal injunction, you haven't secured a fortune, Julian. You have just committed federal financial fraud and document forgery in front of a room full of officers of the court. The heavy mahogany doors at the front of the ballroom burst open once more, admitting two tall, sharp-suited state police investigators accompanied by agents from the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. The lead investigator marched up the stage steps, pulling a set of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt as the 400 guests watched in breathless, stunned silence. "Julian Vance and Gavin Vance," the investigator announced loudly, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You are under arrest for federal financial fraud, attempted grand larceny, document forgery, and the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." Gavin tried to back away toward the curtain, but the second detective intercepted him instantly, forcing his arms behind his back and clicking the cold steel cuffs around his wrists. Julian stood paralyzed as the lead officer turned him around, pulling his arms back and securing the handcuffs tightly. As the detectives escorted the two disgraced men down the stage steps and through the aisle of murmuring, disgusted business peers, Julian turned his head back one last time, his eyes wide with horror, humiliation, and burning regret. Eleanor stood at the center of the stage, her posture straight, her head held high, and her hand resting lightly on her dark wooden cane. Beside her stood Clara, Marcus, and David, forming an unbreakable shield of genuine loyalty around her. There was no petty glee in Eleanor's eyes, only a profound, quiet serenity. She had not sought vengeance. She had sought accountability, truth, and the restoration of her human dignity. As the police vanished through the exit doors with Julian and Gavin, the entire ballroom erupted into a roaring, unanimous standing ovation for Eleanor. Standing under the warm, crystal light, Eleanor looked out at the cheering crowd, knowing that her physical recovery was far from over, but her soul was finally, completely free. In the weeks following the sensational spectacle at the Grand Bohemian Hotel, the machinery of the American criminal justice system moved with swift, unyielding precision against Julian and Gavin Vance. Facing an avalanche of undeniable physical evidence, including forensic accounting logs, time-stamped high-definition surveillance footage from Eleanor's private residence, encrypted audio files, and the intercepted online auction records, the federal prosecutor's office built an airtight indictment that rendered any trial defense completely futile. Recognizing the absolute impossibility of an acquittal, Julian's high-priced defense attorneys negotiated a guilty plea to reduced counts of federal financial fraud, attempted grand larceny, and conspiracy, resulting in a mandatory sentence of 12 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Gavin, convicted of felony conspiracy, document forgery, and attempted theft of private estate property, received an 8-year sentence in a state correctional facility, along with court-ordered financial restitution. Furthermore, the probate judge presiding over the civil proceedings issued an absolute, sweeping decree. Under state slayer and elder exploitation statutes, both Julian and Gavin were legally stripped of any past, present, or future claims to Eleanor's estate, revoking all matrimonial asset rights, insurance beneficiary designations, and trust entitlements. Their names were erased from every corporate ledger and property title associated with Vance Living, forcing them to surrender every luxury asset, vehicle, and bank account acquired through their fraudulent scheme. For Eleanor, watching the legal resolution unfold was not an exercise in vindictive triumph, but rather the quiet, necessary closing of a dark, painful chapter in her life. Justice had not arrived in a burst of destructive anger, but as a calm, restorative truth that established firm boundaries between the parasitic greed that had tried to destroy her and the unshakable life she was determined to rebuild from the ground up. A month before Julian was scheduled for transfer to a federal prison facility to begin his sentence, Eleanor agreed to a single, final meeting inside a neutral, private counseling office in downtown Charlotte. Sitting in a comfortable, sunlit room across a low mahogany table, Julian looked profoundly altered. The suave, arrogant venture capitalist who had once worn bespoke tuxedos and exuded supreme confidence was gone, replaced by a defeated, hollow man in a plain gray jumpsuit, his hair graying at the temples and his hands trembling slightly as he held a paper cup of water. For several long minutes, a heavy, motionless silence hung between them, broken only by the faint hum of the city traffic down below. "I don't expect you to ever forgive me, Eleanor," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse, cracking with genuine shame as he looked down at his shoes. "I lost my way. I convinced myself I was entitled to everything you built, and in doing so, I destroyed my own soul and my son's future." Eleanor sat quietly, her posture erect and poised, her hand resting lightly on the silver handle of her dark wood walking cane. She looked at the man she had loved for 3 years, feeling no surging tide of hatred, no burning urge to scold or humiliate him, but only a deep, melancholic sorrow for the tragic choices he had made out of pure greed. "I do forgive you, Julian," Eleanor said, her voice soft, steady, and resonant with profound emotional clarity. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes widening in utter astonishment and disbelief. You forgive me? After everything I did to you?" Eleanor nodded gently, her gaze clear and unwavering. "Yes, Julian, I forgive you. Not because your actions were acceptable, and not for your sake, but for my own. Holding on to resentment toward you would mean allowing you to occupy space inside my mind, allowing your betrayal to continue dictating my future. I forgive you so that I can leave you in the past, entirely free from the burden of your bitterness." With those final, healing words, Eleanor stood up, turned her back on her past, and walked out into the sunlight, completely liberated from hatred. With her legal and physical battles resolved, Eleanor turned her immense energy toward constructing a lasting legacy of genuine compassion, assembling her inner circle inside the glass-walled boardroom of Vance Living headquarters. Sitting at the head of the executive conference table, beside Marcus Sterling, Eleanor presented Clara Jenkins with an official, gold-embossed leather binder containing a life-changing proposal. Recognizing that Clara's extraordinary clinical vigilance, human empathy, and unwavering moral courage were the very catalysts that had saved her life inside the ICU, Eleanor officially announced the establishment of the newly endowed Eleanor Vance Neurorehabilitation Foundation, a $50 million nonprofit trust dedicated to providing comprehensive, long-term physical and neurological therapy to low-income stroke and trauma survivors whose insurance policies ran out. Eleanor turned to Clara, her eyes shining with profound warmth, and slid the executive appointment contract across the polished table. "Clara, I am officially offering you the position of executive director of the foundation," Eleanor announced, her voice filled with deep respect. You will have complete operational authority over our medical grants, patient admissions, and clinical care partnerships, accompanied by an executive compensation package that reflects the immense value of your dedication." Clara stared at the document in stunned silence, her hand trembling as she read the terms of the position, which included full executive benefits, research funding, and a salary 3 times what she earned as a bedside nurse. "Eleanor?" "I don't know what to say," Clara stammered, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at the young woman she had guarded in the dark of night. "I was just doing my job as a nurse." Eleanor reached across the table, wrapping her hands warmly around Clara's. "You didn't just do your job, Clara. You saw my humanity when the world treated me like a ghost. You gave me back my voice. And now, together, we are going to give thousands of vulnerable patients their voices back too." Before Clara could fully process the magnitude of her new executive role, Eleanor smiled warmly and gestured toward Marcus, who pulled a second velvet-trimmed folder from his leather briefcase. "There is one more matter we must attend to, Clara," Eleanor said softly, her voice brimming with quiet joy as she opened the folder. "During those long night shifts in the ICU, you told me about your younger brother, Leo, about his incredible intelligence, his passion for architectural design, and the immense sacrifices your family made to learn American Sign Language together after he lost his hearing as a child." Eleanor pushed a series of fully executed legal and academic documents toward Clara. "Effective today, the Vance Foundation has established a fully endowed perpetual trust in Leo's name. It covers his complete tuition, room, board, and specialized assistive technology for a 4-year master's degree in sustainable architecture at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. Clara gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth as tears spilled freely down her cheeks, washing away years of quiet financial stress and worry for her brother's future. But Eleanor was not finished. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, her expression radiating deep fulfillment, "we have finalized the purchase of a historic building in downtown Charlotte that will be completely renovated into the Leo Jenkins Deaf Advocacy and Cultural Center, a state-of-the-art facility providing free ASL education, vocational training, and adaptive technology access for deaf youth throughout the region. Leo will serve as the honorary student director on the advisory board." Overwhelmed by the staggering generosity and thoughtful depth of Eleanor's gift, Clara broke down in tears of pure gratitude, rising from her chair to throw her arms around Eleanor in a tight, weeping embrace. "You have changed my family's life forever, Eleanor," Clara sobbed against her shoulder. Eleanor held the young nurse close, whispering softly into her ear, "You saved my life, Clara. Giving Leo a future is simply the universe coming full circle." As the emotional embrace slowly subsided, Clara wiped her eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and reached into her large tote bag, pulling out a small, exquisite mahogany wooden box lined with dark velvet. She placed the box gently on the table in front of Eleanor, her expression shifting to one of quiet, sacred reverence. "There is one final thing, Eleanor," Clara whispered, pushing the box closer. "While you were fighting for your life in the hospital, and while Gavin was listing your personal life on online auction sites, Marcus, David, and I realized that some things in this world are far too precious to ever be priced in dollars." Eleanor looked at the wooden box, her breath catching in her throat as she carefully unlatched the brass clasp and lifted the lid. Resting inside on the soft black velvet was her late mother's complete heirloom jewelry collection, including the delicate pearl necklace her mother had worn on her wedding day, the hand-carved silver locket containing her parents' faded black and white photograph, and the vintage emerald ring her father had saved up for 3 years to buy. Every single piece that Gavin had stolen and attempted to liquidate had been quietly tracked down, bought back, and restored by Clara and Marcus using their own personal savings before the legal freeze took effect. Eleanor reached out with a trembling hand, her fingers gently tracing the smooth surface of her mother's pearl necklace. For the first time since the catastrophic truck crash on the rain-slicked highway, Eleanor wept. Not out of pain, physical exhaustion, or the bitter sting of betrayal, but out of a deep, overflowing, and profoundly healing gratitude for the pure goodness of the human heart. The physical injuries were healing, her real estate empire was secured, and the perpetrators of greed were brought to justice. But it was this simple act of selfless love that truly mended her broken spirit. Eleanor held the velvet box close to her chest, looking up at Clara, Marcus, and David through her tears, knowing that her soul was completely, beautifully whole once again. 6 months after her triumphant return to Vance Living and the public unraveling of Julian's conspiracy, Eleanor made the most liberating decision of her life. She placed the 3-story stone mansion overlooking Lake Norman on the market. To the outside world, observers assumed she was selling the estate to erase the dark memories of betrayal that lingered in its towering archways and 12 cavernous fireplaces. But in truth, the mansion had never represented betrayal to Eleanor. It represented her early, naive definition of success, a grand physical monument to status and wealth that she no longer needed to validate her existence. Real success, she had learned through trauma, possessed no floor plan, no marble countertops, and no perimeter fence. Instead of staying in the grand estate, Eleanor purchased a modest 3-bedroom craftsman cottage situated on a quiet, pine-forested cove 20 minutes down the shoreline. The new home featured warm oak floors, exposed wooden beams, and a wide, wraparound porch that sat just yards above the glass-like water. The day the moving trucks cleared out her belongings, Eleanor stood in the center of the cottage's sunlit living room, holding only a small duffel bag and her mother's restored jewelry box. She looked out through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors as the afternoon light shimmered across the lake, feeling an unprecedented sense of stillness wash over her soul. This cottage was not a step down. It was an elevation of her spirit. It was a space designed not for entertaining hundreds of superficial acquaintances, but for housing real peace, genuine healing, and true human connection. The grand mansion had belonged to her past, but this quiet lakeside sanctuary belonged to her future. Life at the Lakeside cottage settled into a tranquil, soul-restoring rhythm that centered around simple pleasures and deep, meaningful relationships. Every Saturday morning, the wide front porch became the vibrant gathering place for Eleanor's true family, the people who had stood by her when she had nothing left to give but her silent resilience. Clara Jenkins, now thriving in her executive role as director of the Vance Foundation, would arrive with fresh pastries from the local bakery, sharing enthusiastic updates about Leo's progress in Washington and the new clinical grants approved for stroke victims. David Vance, having retired permanently from hospital work, came by to ensure Eleanor maintained her physical conditioning, though their formal therapy sessions had evolved into cheerful, competitive walks along the wooded lake trails. Marcus Sterling, abandoning his stiff corporate suits for comfortable linen shirts, would sit in a rocking chair with a hot mug of black coffee, laughing heartily as he recounted stories from his early days as a young country lawyer. Eleanor would sit among them, her walking cane resting against her chair, sipping her favorite herbal tea and taking in the warmth of their laughter. There were no hidden agendas, no corporate posturing, and no transactional demands in these moments. Only the pure, unvarnished comfort of mutual respect and genuine affection. For a 34-year-old woman who had spent a decade chasing success in the cutthroat world of real estate, this quiet porch had become her most cherished paradise, a sanctuary where her heart could rest without fear or hesitation. Autumn brought the official dedication ceremony of the newly completed Vance Neuro Rehabilitation Center in downtown Charlotte, marking Eleanor's formal return to the public eye on her own terms. The state-of-the-art facility, funded entirely through her foundation, offered comprehensive physical therapy, occupational training, and mental health counseling to trauma survivors, regardless of their financial standing or insurance limitations. Standing before a gathering of healthcare workers, former patients, civic leaders, and local journalists, Eleanor stepped up to the podium without a script, holding her wooden cane lightly in her right hand. The applause was warm and prolonged, but as she raised her hand, an attentive hush fell over the crowd. "When I lay paralyzed in an intensive care unit 3 months ago," Eleanor began, her voice rich, clear, and ringing with deep conviction, "I learned that the most terrifying loss a person can experience is not the loss of their physical mobility, nor the loss of their wealth. It is the loss of hope. I was fortunate enough to have people who believed in my humanity when I could not speak for myself. But thousands of survivors face their darkest nights entirely alone, told by cold insurance algorithms that their recovery has reached an acceptable limit." Eleanor paused, looking out at the rows of stroke survivors and young accident victims seated in the front rows. This center was built on a simple, uncompromising principle. No human life is disposable, and no story is over simply because it encountered a tragedy. We are not just rebuilding bodies within these walls. We are restoring the fundamental right of every survivor to dream, to fight, and to build their lives anew. In the quiet evenings that followed, as the crisp autumn wind rustled through the oak trees outside her cottage, Eleanor spent long hours writing in her journal, reflecting on the profound transformation that had reshaped her life. She realized that the true measure of a woman's strength was never found in the flawless execution of a perfect life, nor in the accumulation of corporate titles, but in the quiet, courageous choice to rise after being stripped of everything. Society often praised young, successful entrepreneurs for their ambition and unstoppable momentum. Yet true wisdom was forged only in the furnace of unexpected vulnerability. Falling down had not weakened her. It had stripped away the superficial noise of her existence, forcing her to confront her own core values and discover an indomitable well of inner strength she never knew she possessed. Her 34 years of life had been divided by a single, catastrophic instant on a rain-slicked highway. But that tragedy had not destroyed her narrative. It had redefined it. She no longer viewed her recovery as a journey back to the person she used to be, but as an evolution into the woman she was always meant to become. A leader grounded not in ambition, but in empathy. A survivor who understood that vulnerability was not a weakness to be hidden, but the very soil from which genuine courage grows. She had rebuilt an empire brick by brick, but her greatest architectural masterpiece was the unshakable, peaceful soul she had constructed inside her own chest. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting a breathtaking tapestry of gold, crimson, and deep violet across the quiet waters of the lake, Eleanor walked down to the end of her wooden dock. A soft breeze rippled across the water, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She stood at the edge, leaning lightly on her cane, her face bathed in the warm, fading light of the day. Looking out across the vast expanse, she remembered the cold, dark days in the ICU, when even a single breath felt like an insurmountable mountain to climb. She remembered the heartbreak of betrayal, the agonizing sweat of secret midnight therapy sessions, and the terrifying silence of being trapped inside her own mind. Yet, as she looked at her reflection mirrored in the clear water below, she felt no lingering bitterness, no residue of fear, and no regret. Every scar on her body, every painful step she had taken, and every tear she had shed had led her directly to this moment of absolute, undisturbed peace. True wealth, she realized, was never found in the grandeur of a mansion or the digits in a bank account. It was found in the quiet stillness of a grateful heart, in the loyalty of true friends, and in the unyielding courage to choose love over hatred. Eleanor took a deep, peaceful breath of the fresh evening air, feeling a profound, radiant warmth filling her chest. She turned her face toward the setting sun, a soft, beautiful smile gracing her lips, knowing with absolute certainty that her story was not over. It had only just begun.